Okay, so this morning we're going to talk about biomes and the structure of the biosphere on Earth. This is kind of a macro to micro examination of life on planet. And so before we get a chance to really talk about the pieces of the entire ecosystem slash biome, what you want to think about is a little bit about if you were going to work on a car engine and you never knew what a car engine was. Would you just go out and start taking it apart and setting parts aside? Wouldn't you want to know what each part does? Wouldn't you want to know the names of those parts? Would you like to know how they all work together to make the entire engine work? And so when we're talking about the biosphere and breaking it up into biomes and eventually into ecosystems and even down to the individual components of the ecosystem, don't you want to make sure that you have a handle on how all those things kind of work together to create this giant engine that we call Earth? So we're going to talk a little bit about the living world. And so let's talk a little bit about the biosphere first. And you might remember from biology that the prefix bio means life, and sphere is an entire circular object. So when we're talking about Earth, yes, of course the Earth is round. However, the Earth has different spheres within it. And within those spheres lie all of the life on Earth. So let's look at that a little bit closer. The structure of the biosphere includes the atmosphere, the lithosphere, and the hydrosphere. And in environmental science, it's important to know prefixes and suffixes. Like bio means life, sphere means circular ball. In this case, lithosphere, L-I-T-H-O, sphere. Litho means Earth's crust. The lithosphere is a very thin layer of the outer layer of the Earth. So that's the mineral component, the rock component of the planet. The hydrosphere, the prefix hydro means water. So the hydrosphere is anywhere that there's water on the planet. It includes our oceans, rivers, streams, even groundwater within the planet. And some of that water is in the atmosphere. That leads us into the atmosphere. Atmos means air. Atmosphere is that thin veil of air that surrounds the planet. Life actually exists from the surface of the Earth up quite a few dozen miles into the atmosphere. Bacteria, viruses sometimes can be found really high up in the atmosphere. So when you combine those three, we make it into the biosphere, and you might see in the center here, ecosphere. And the prefix eco means house, and sphere is kind of our circular house, the entire planet. So biosphere, anywhere on the planet that life can exist. It includes the lithosphere, atmosphere, hydrosphere, and those together collectively make up the ecosphere. We talk about organization of life on the planet. What you might be more familiar with are individual components that you see. Maybe if you've been out in the woods, you've been in the grasslands, you see individual organisms. Okay, in this case, we have a pronghorn antelope. It is an individual of a population. So populations are made up of organisms. Populations together collectively make up communities. Communities make up our ecosystems. And ecosystems and biomes collectively make up that biosphere that we're talking about. So it's a hierarchy. Now below the population level, you're getting into biology. That's where you start to talk about organs, organ systems, cells. Below the cellular level, you're really getting into chemistry. So the realm of environmental science is really the individual unit of the life, the population, all the way up to the grand organization of the biosphere. Talk about a species, and we need to redefine that for environmental science, because species are individual organisms that can interbreed with each other and produce offspring. And when we talk about biodiversity later, we'll talk about species and biodiversity decline or biodiversity increase, talking about differences in speciation. So on this slide, you'll see biosphere, ecosystem, community, population. Organisms. Okay, so keep that in mind as we move forward, because we're going to see that human impacts all of these areas. Humans impact all of these areas. And how they impact them is of extreme importance to trying to resolve some of the issues that we see on planet Earth. So let's talk a little bit about the individual biomes. And with each of the biomes, again, bio means life. Biome is a large unit of life. And biomes are large units of life that have similar characteristics throughout. Typically, they have a common climate pattern. They have a common set of plants and animals throughout, but they're distinguished by differences in their climates and in their individual populations of plants and animals. And so scientists roughly have identified approximately 8 to 10 different biomes. We're going to talk about 6 or 7 of the major biomes on the planet. And again, biosphere now broken into individual biomes. So big parts of the engine, like the air filter, maybe the carburetor, not the individual pistons, rods, and springs inside an engine. So let's talk about those biomes just a little bit. One of the questions that you might have, I know I always had, why are the biomes where they are? Why aren't all biomes everywhere? Why don't we have the same biome across the entire planet? Why isn't the whole planet a forest? Why isn't the whole planet a grassland? Why isn't the whole planet a desert? Like on Mars. Mars is pretty much a desert. Okay, so there are some differences about why the biomes are where they are and why we see common patterns. If you look on a map, you'll see you can move north from the equator, the biomes change. You move south from the equator, the biomes change. And they change latitudinally. And it's very interesting when you see those differences. And there's a lot of different factors that come into play as far as biomes being where they are and what they are. So let's take a look at those factors. One of the major distributing factors of biomes is climate. And within climate, the 2 main characteristics that are really important are precipitation and temperature in that order. And it's very important to remember that precipitation, rainfall, snowfall, is really the defining factor of why a biome is a biome. For instance, you could have a biome over here that's cold, a biome over here that's cold. If the biome that's cold gets more moisture than the biome over here, they're going to have different characteristics. So the number one defining factor of biome location is precipitation, followed very closely by temperature. And you'll see patterns as we go forward. In the United States, if you just look at a kind of a rainfall pattern of the United States, I don't know if many of you all have traveled across the United States. You could pick any country of the world and you'd probably see similar patterns. But in some areas of the country, it rains more than it does in other areas. If you look at a rainfall map of the United States, as we move towards the east and especially towards the southeast, rainfall increases. And as rainfall increases, it's a very interesting pattern. Vegetation gets taller. And so that is one of the things that we talk about when we talk about precipitation having an impact on a biome location. As vegetation gets bigger, typically animals get bigger along with that vegetation. It's a very interesting pattern. I'm from Oklahoma. In western Oklahoma, we have grasses that are 1 or 2 inches tall because it's very dry. As you move towards the east in Oklahoma, the grasses get taller and taller and taller and taller until you have some grasses that are 9 feet high. A little bit further east, the grasses give way to shrubs and trees. And if you keep going to the east, you start to run into big oak trees and hickory trees and pine trees. So if you go opposite towards the Great Basin, things get smaller and smaller and smaller. So what I'm emphasizing is that precipitation really has a defining impact upon what type of biome is where. So this is just kind of a micro-region view of the United States, and you can see there's a number of different what we call miniature biomes or ecoregions within the United States, and those are directly related to the last slide that we just had, which had to do with rainfall. So if we blend those two together, you can see some of those ecoregions kind of match up. As you move across a nation, another few factors that come into play as far as biome location and type of biome is altitude. Also proximity to oceans. If you have a biome that's near an ocean, the ocean typically moderates the temperature of the biome onshore. Now sometimes oceans will lend itself well to increasing precipitation into a biome close to it. Sometimes oceans actually suck the moisture away from the biome. So it's not necessarily a moisture thing if you're proximal to an ocean, but it does have a moderating effect temperature-wise. So proximity to oceans, altitude plays a role, and then barriers such as mountain ranges. You have a biome or an ecoregion that occurs between 2 mountain regions. You can have major influences on what type of biome or what type of ecoregion will appear there. So this is a world view. We're talking about now across the world. If you think about it, the hottest place on Earth is the equator. And we will talk about that. The sun strikes more directly at the equator. So when we talk about the temperature layers of the Earth, typically the equator is much warmer. And as you move north or south of the equator, temperatures cool. And that has a lot to do with the curvature of the Earth. As temperatures get colder, of course, biomes are going to change. Talk about productivity of biomes. Some of our more productive biomes are in the water. Water, there can be biomes in the water, but we don't typically break them apart so much. Today we're talking more about terrestrial biomes, but some of our more productive biomes on land are tropical rainforests, and there's association with water again. And some of our more productive ecosystems in water are places where there's a lot of nutrients, and of course there's going to be water, so you don't have to worry about that. Anywhere there's a lot of nutrition, a lot of rainfall, you're going to have very productive biomes. And productivity is simply a measure of how much life exists and is able to grow and exist in a biome or in a location. When we're talking about, again, North America, if you look at North America, you have decreasing temperatures as you go from the south to the north in North America. But you have varying precipitation as you go from west to east. And if you look closely, you'll see that there are specific factors within North America that cause the biomes to be located where they are. Southeast United States is more of a temperate deciduous forest. Centralized United States up into Canada, grasslands. If you go north, very north part of North America, it's tundra. Just below the tundra is taiga, and we're going to look at these individually. And then you have desert, you have a temperate rainforest on the west coast, and you also have some microregions embedded within those. And again, just going from west to east, you will cross over multiple biomes located in North America. Let's talk about the world's terrestrial biomes. And the question that you might have, like, what do I need to know about each of the world's biomes? What we want to know is kind of the basic structure of the biome, a little bit about the rainfall. They're not going to ask you questions about specific rainfall too much, but in general, the relationship of rainfall from one biome to another. They might ask you more about what are some of the human influences on that particular biome. So I'm going to go through the world's biomes and talk a little bit about temperature, precipitation, and also talk a little bit about the major human influences on that biome so that you will be able to write towards those when asked.